Hey everybody, this is Anne, and welcome back to Painting Big. Today we're going to talk about old paint. When you've got an old paint, it's been sitting in your closet for ages, you take it out, it looks kind of sus, it's all separated out, maybe it's really gunky, really thick. Can you save it? Most of the time, yes. Let's get into it. Alright, so let's talk about a few things. First of all, different types of bottles are going to have different lifespans for the paint inside of them. Some of you already know this. Anybody who's used flip-top bottles knows that not only does the paint tend to get a little gritty because the paint dries around the outside rim and it tends to fall in, but you also know that your paint tends to thicken and maybe get evaporate faster, right? Because you've got this wide opening and it's all open to the air, so it's going to evaporate a little bit more readily. Whereas things with like the mustard top bottle, which is not a double seal, but it's at least not quite giving you as much surface area exposed to the air when you're using it, like the Pro Acryl here. The Master Series, Vallejo, anybody with a dropper bottle, these are actually the highest longevity because you've got two seals. You've got this nipple and then you've got the cap, and that makes essentially a double seal, keeping your paint from the air. Now, be aware that any plastic will leach oxygen. This is permeable. It might not look like it to us because obviously it's not leaking out the sides, but to air, this plastic is permeable. So air will slowly evaporate out of the bottle even when you've kept it sealed. And this is why you can open up a paint bottle years in and see a goopy mess that all the water appears to have evaporated out of. Okay, so you open up your bottle or you look at it, you find it in the back of your closet, right? It's the exact color you wanted to find, you just never used it or you haven't used it for a long time. And you notice that it's separated. You notice that maybe the top looks like it does not a firm color. It's watery, really watery. It's not the color of the paint at all. And it's been like that for who knows how long. And then you try to shake it and it doesn't shake up, and you're starting to get these ding 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 danger feelings. And so the thing you need to do to determine if your old paint is able to be used or saved is you got to open that up. Obviously, that's easier with a flip-top bottle than it is with one of these, but if you don't want to get your fingers dirty, just grab a Kleenex and open up the top. Usually you just got to kind of wobble it until it comes out. And then what you're going to do is you're going to take like an old paintbrush, skinny one if you can, and you're going to stick it down in there, and you are going to see if there's any goop, essentially. If everything is just like kind of a plug that it's dried out to, or if you've got any like actual paste paint down there. So this obviously we're okay. We've got a lot of fluidity. And that's great. That means if you have even a tiny bit, as long as there's a paste, as long as you can stir it, even if it's hard, even if it's difficult to stir, if you can stir it, you can hypothetically bring this back. So stir it around. What I usually recommend, since most of the water probably has evaporated, don't pour out the watery stuff on top. That's actually binder. It's got other stuff in it that helps the paint come together. But you can put some extra drops of water in there. In a really bad case, I'll use hot water just because the extra agitation of the molecules, to me, seems to help a little bit. But do whatever you like. Start out with maybe 20 drops of water. Start stirring everything around. Stir it and stir it and stir it and stir it. There's no quick way to solve this. But stir it up until you feel like it's at least, dispersed decently with the water. Then, if you can, use bits of sprue from Metal Miniatures or some extra, like if you've got hematite beads, whatever you use for agitators. These are old Reaper skulls. We used to use these as agitators in Master Series paint before it got too expensive to do. But put some extra agitators in. I'll usually do like 3 or 4. And then you're going to have to shake the bejeebus out of it. If you have a vortex mixer or something like that, a mixer that's made specifically for paint bottles, you can do that, or you can just sit there with it yourself. You want to hear those agitators going back and forth. After a while, stop, stir again, work it back and forth until your paint looks creamy and like it might work. Then you got to test it. You got to squeeze it out onto a palette, look at it. Does it seem watery? Then it's probably not all. You've probably still got a lot of that initial fluid still in there that's not quite all in solution with all of your bits, then continue to stir and stir and stir. And slowly, as long as you can stir it, it should come back into solution. It just takes time at that point. If you stick your brush in here and it's a rubbery plug feeling on the bottom of the bottle, what has happened is that everything has settled out. Now with water-based, this doesn't really happen with alcohol-based paint, but with water-based paints, the resins, and by that I mean like the acrylic, the actual plastic bits that make up the thing that cures your paint, but all of that stuff starts to settle out. And over the course of years, depending on the size and heaviness of the resin particle, it will condense into a plug that you just can't stir. It essentially becomes just a plug of plastic. At that point, you can't bring it back. You have to buy a new bottle, or if it's an old paint that just isn't made anymore, you're kind of screwed. But yeah, so that's the difference, is can you stir it? If you can stir it, you can probably bring it back. If you can't, if it's really plasticky, it's essentially, we used to call it latexing, but of course most paints don't have actual latex in them anymore. But yeah, it's become a plug, so it's doomed. Let's talk about some tips to keep your paint from doing just that. I usually recommend that, at least for colors that you use like every once in a while, you want to make sure you're shaking them at least once every couple of years. At the most, with Master Series, I think you could probably go 4 or 5 years without shaking and still have okay paint. We've actually tested Master Series. When you shake it at least once a year, and every few years I'll add a few extra drops of water, like 20 extra drops of water, you can keep these good for like 15 years. I had bottles at Reaper HQ that I used regularly for color matching in batches when I was making the paint line, that had been around since the very first batch, and they were still good because they were shaken regularly, because every time I went to use them to check the color, I would shake the bottle, and then when it got thick, I would add some water. So if you do that, then you can keep your paint good for a very, very long time. That applies also to paint pot paints. These, however, have an extra trick. So if you're trying to preserve, this is an old Games Workshop. I have actually like 3 bottles of this because it's my favorite silver paint ever, and I keep them good. And not only do I shake, not only do I add water when I see that they're starting to look thick, but store these upside down. You don't want to do that with dropper bottles, because essentially stuff's going to drop down and the aperture is so small that it'll clog. So you don't do this with droppers. You always store your droppers like on the side or upright. But with pot paints, what you're doing is essentially you're making a fluid seal here. So instead of this, where the paint is down here and all this air can come in through these areas, you're turning it over so this is all liquid. So air doesn't come in nearly as readily then, right? All your air is here and it's all perfectly sealed. So the only air leaching in and out is whatever can get through the plastic, which is very, very slow. So by storing these upside down, habitually shaking and adding water every year or 2, I can keep them good pretty much. I mean, well, I've kept them good for 20 years. So does that say anything? But yeah. So storage, shaking, and adding water. Obviously, if you have a huge paint collection, this can get impractical pretty quick, or it can feel impractical. I mean, at that point, though, how many of those paints are you really using, right? Maybe start to prioritize your paint collection where you keep like colors that you have, but you don't have a project for them anytime soon, and kind of remove those out of the way and kind of put a date on the box saying, shake in 2025. If you really want to keep them all good. But otherwise, the stuff that you use regularly isn't in danger typically. If you see it getting thick, stop, add some water to it, shake it up. But otherwise, if you're using it regularly, you should be shaking it regularly, so it should be just fine. And like I said, dropper bottle paints, they can last for well over a decade. If you take really good care of them, 2 decades, maybe more. We haven't really been able, Master Series has only been around for 20 years, so we really haven't been able to test beyond that. Anyway, guys, there you go. Can you resuscitate old paints? Yes! Oh, one more tip. If you want to, you can add a little bit of flow improver to your paint when you resuscitate it. Reaper Master Series paints already have Flow Improver added to them, just in the course of us making the batches we add Flow Improver, so you guys don't have to. But if you're using a different brand, a little bit of Flow Improver isn't going to hurt it, and it can help to keep things level and keep things in solution, which is good when you're trying to keep that, if you're going to stuff those boxes in your closet so you need them, it can help them keep from settling out quite so fast. All right, thanks so much for tuning in. I hope you learned something from the video, and hey, go out there and save your old paint, right? This is Ann signing off.